take the stage.
Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the hall is a bit empty, but I wanted to apologize beforehand. I'm not selling anything. So if you wanted a product demo or something, this is not going to be it. And then another question I've seen, it's a kind of popular thing in the presentations, like a show of hands. So please raise your hand if you own a smartphone. Okay. So bad news is you actually do not own it. So everybody who raised their hands, which is basically everybody, it's not your device. And this is going to be a presentation about why it is so. So basically it's about firmware over the air, and we will be looking at one particular firmware. So this is basically an outline. First will be like a short introduction about what it's all about. Then what our research, what we found. Then there's about response from company responsible, and then some conclusions. So let's start with other direction and introduction. So basically firmware is a system software that users on mobile phones never see. So basically that's part of the software that is in control of the device manufacturer. So that's long story short. You'll be able later read all the boring text on your own from the slides. So what is Adups FOTA? Oh, did I mention? Yeah, it's FOTA is actually, there's a firmware, and there's like firmware update, and then there's firmware update over there. That's what the acronym stands for. So basically it's about firmware and firmware updates. And Adups FOTA is, there's a company that provides this firmware and firmware update service as an outsourced service to companies who want to make devices, usually cheap devices, but that doesn't change the fact that it's about making, outsourcing the whole firmware production and installation process. So, November last year, CryptoWire came, it's an organization, you can find something, the quote, is this a button? Yeah, quote, this part is actually a link, it's clickable in the PDF file. So you can go and see they discovered, I mean, first they quote this quote about the market share of Adups as a company. And as you can see, it's a lot of users, market share exceeding the whole world, and they have offices all over the world. Basically, they own everything, apparently. And in the same newsflash, they reveal what they found about the device, about one particular device. So, and what they found is that the device is actually sending information to servers in China, which it should not be sending. So it's full body text messages, applications, call history, all kinds of stuff that it shouldn't be sending. And they also include some indicators of, and these particularly were interesting because we used these in our research as a starting point. So let's continue with our research. So using those indicators, those URLs, we analyzed some traffic, and what we found is that indeed there's some traffic sent over plain HTTP, post data is obfuscated, and but generally it looked like a legitimate firmware update service and all the usual traffic that's actually necessary to provide firmware update functionality. And we also got a number of devices to analyze. So this is how the average one of the requests, what it's look like. Basically, you have the host where it's going to, the path, and then some data, which is a key parameter, and some hexadecimal digits. And unscrambling those hexadecimal digits, I mean the data and that's scrambled, we see what they're actually sending is all kind of device identifying parameters, which is email code, MAC address, and all device resolution, and then some version numbers, specific, basically everything they can have to actually identify a device model. And in most cases, why the data is there is because they want, first of all, they want to see, for marketing reasons, they want to know which devices, which mobile operator, in which countries, which users they prefer, all kind of, big data. We need all of it. So, but it still doesn't justify including all complete numbers. For instance, for IMSI numbers, you only need a prefix which identifies a country and operator. You don't need a specific user's number. So that's kind of an example what they could have done if they actually cared about privacy. So as a response to this request, we see here JSON. This is one of the examples. And they are doing these requests periodically on a timer, and this is particularly one of the responses. It includes URL where to actually go next time when they're looking for updates. So our first question was, if it's all done over HTTP, I'll have to increase my pace because it's a lot of slides. I'll skip on the other part later, probably because of this. But anyway, our question was, can we, if it's plain HTTP, can we sit in the middle and actually filter out the bad kind of traffic? And the bad news is no, we couldn't, because the APKs and everything have to be signed, and they're actually doing their checks. And in this kind of scenario, everything looks good. And then there's also a bunch of APKs and packages that's actually relevant to this firmware update process. And there are 4 of them. And I would like you to notice there's Adups FOTA and FW upgrade and stuff. And in the normal, in one of the devices, which, yes, actually, yeah, let's short description of what those are. Adups FOTA is basically the user-facing kind of part where they provide you an interface. They're saying oh, you have updates. Click here if you want to install and restart now, or blah, 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 stuff like that. And then there's the other part, which is actually a system service, which the previous package actually communicates with and says oh, I have downloaded this stuff. Please install it and reboot and everything else. And this other part, which in one of our devices, like the normal case, legitimate firmware update software, which was empty, but it was there as a placeholder, or I don't know, historical technical debt or whatever it is. For whatever reasons, it was there, but it was empty. And on another device, it was actually not empty. It contained packages, actually code, which identified itself as Adups FOTA, and actually the whole packages and APKs and everything, it's getting confusing. But this one is bad, and the rest of the talk will be about this one, because it's really bad. So there's CompTSC check package. And it actually has callback home functionality. There are some strings in the code. We actually decompiled the source, and we can see there are some base 64 encoded strings, another long one. This is one long one. And this is a passphrase, and then there's an encryption. This is an encryption routine. There's also a decryption one, obviously. But basically, there's an initialization vector, and the encryption cipher, mode, and padding, and all the parameters we need to actually look into the data. So when we do, we discover that those strings are these URLs, HTTP and some domains. And the last one, that was a separate one, it is this one, which we've discovered is actually a command and control URL for command and control. And what it does, it actually does requests to this URL with some parameters, and depending on the response, it can do basically 4 things. It can retrieve and install an APK, and basically, yeah, it's the way it does it. Actually, the way it does everything is by dumping files on the file system and using shell commands by string concatenation, and actually using command line utilities instead of Android provided services. But basically, it can also uninstall a package. And the funny part here is that if it fails to uninstall a package, it actually remounts the file system, removes the directory, and actually mounts it back as in read-only mode. So basically, really, they want to ensure that if they want to uninstall something, it's really gone. And then it can disable and enable a package, also using shell commands. Anyway, what this means is that anybody with the access to the private keys, because to install a package, the keys must match, but they can install whatever package they want on a particular, very specific device, which can be identified by the parameters we saw earlier. Then there's another package, analytics, COM-MSG analytics, which contains all other URLs, kill me, okay. Basically, plain text strings and everything, and some timer values, which it basically periodically does stuff, sends and receives data from URLs. And there's also stuff that actually does collect the data from the phone and puts it in a files, then puts those files in a zip file, and then sends over to China. And this is actually the part which CryptoWire report was actually about. So all the data files are put into one archive. Before sending, it's encrypted, but the decryption key and the initialization vector is actually in the source, so no big deal. And you can actually decrypt that if here's the password and you know the initialization vector. And then there's another thing we found funny, is that these APKs in their metadata, they have these project strings. This one looks like a MediaTek something version project, but these two are actually look really, really weird, some kind of custom projects. But those are strings, they're not really used in the source, but they're always sent along with the request. So basically on the other end, they can actually see what it is. Anyway, then CryptoWire also in the report includes some IP addresses. And these ones are, they say this one is a kind of okay, legitimate traffic, and this one is the domain with the IP address with the command and control center. And what we afterwards, in January, we did the research. And what we discovered is that when they first reported this problem on October 28, those kind of, as they say, legitimate domains were actually removed from that IP address, and they were moved over to this IP address, and the other IP address, which was used for 4 domains, they were moved only later. on November 15. Anyway, here's a detailed list of what domains were moved at what time. So the first one was moved on October 28, basically in 15 minutes, immediately. It was moved, and in like less than 20 minutes, it was all gone and never seen again. Then the other IP address moved to that one at different times. One is like November 15, moved over 3 days, like last seen 3 days later. Then there's 2 more domains which also disappear around this same time, but as we see later, they only appear 15 days later. And then basically everything else. But by the November 18, they're all actually moved and never seen again on these IP addresses. Another thing is this IP address, which was used for command and control, we saw earlier, it was running on a different IP address, and it's still active today and still functioning and still sending traffic. And one of the reasons is probably maybe because the CryptoWire guys, they were analyzing version 5 of the software. This, what we analyzed was an earlier version, which is version 4.5, I think. But basically still alive, still kicking. This IP address was never mentioned in the report. I don't know, maybe that's the reason why it's still there. But anyway. Now, I don't know how much time we have. 10 minutes, okay, should be enough. Basically, what was the Adups response to this CryptoWire report? Basically, in the introduction, they say that, oh, recently some questions have been raised on about software on certain blue devices. And they say the information has been misleading and inaccurate. So let's see what happened. Apparently, there's one version of their software that inadvertently was applied to certain blue mobile devices and only collected certain user data running on these phones. And also, Adups has promptly taken steps to actually remedy the situation. So basically, they say they are deleting the data and remove the data collection functionality. Then they turn like to specific questions, like what information was involved. And they mention like 5 different kinds of information. And here, they listed like device information, cell tower ID, application data, SMS message frequency data, and phone numbers, but not usernames. And they explain why, for the first 3 items, apparently it's to facilitate like their services, but they never explain the last 2 about SMS messages. And it actually contradicts directly what CryptoWire put in their report, that bodies of text messages and contact lists were actually transmitted because they had like dumps of data, of packets, of traffic, you know. But they never bothered to explain this part. Then, in continuation, they mentioned that all the collected data is not, using the data is not possible to identify a specific user and cannot be combined with other data to identify a user. So that's also lies. And yeah, even if they say that they cannot, the Adups, the company, we don't know what their organizational structure, what the traffic, everybody knows about big firewalls of China, and we don't know where the traffic goes and who has laid their hands on. So even if they don't, it still should not put our minds at ease. What information, like in continuation, what's more, the software was not, they say that the software was not designed to collect the information, but apparently it was doing something, and they don't say why the functionality was there in the first place. And then, yes, another contradiction to CryptoWire's report. The next question, what safeguards does Adups have to protect the customer data it collected? And there, here starts the funny part. Like, for example, all data was carried over HTTPS protocol. And yes, for version 5, and this is the only version they actually ever mention in their response, but as we saw, earlier versions, before version 5, they are also affected, but as they are never mentioned, and we'll see more on this later. So in addition, they also mentioned that stuff was encrypted, okay. All user data, everything was compressed, so they put important stress on no clear text ever available, but who cares? Why would they even care to say about all of these things? Because we already know it's all going over HTTPS. More safeguards, sensitive data such as SMS messages, and this is like their wording. They say SMS messages, not the SMS message frequency data, and everything else they say it was encrypted before compression, and we do believe them that it was encrypted, but they're contradicting themselves. And even if they delete the data from the phone after they've collected it, who cares? Because we know that our data is on our phones, so that's not really relevant. This is the best part. What safeguards does Adups have to protect? And they say that all the data was transferred to an internal secure server that cannot be accessed remotely. And what's more, the storage server is located in a tier 4. Who does, show of hands, who knows what a tier 4 data center is? It's a kind of industrial kind of thing. And basically, yeah, and this data center is actually physically isolated from external contact. So apparently they have their data center in space, physically isolated from anything, but it's a tier 4 data center, it's good. And it cannot be accessed remotely. So if it's in space, how do they operate it? Nobody knows. This is like more, they're just playing with words. They mention firewalls, externally accessible proxy servers, public key authentication that's more supposedly more secure than ordinary authentication, and then basically throwing security and infosec like jargon at people. Maybe somebody falls for it. To the question, did anybody other than Adups have access to the information? Nobody, including government and private companies. Nobody had access to our data. So what has Adups done with the collected information? Well, apparently, after they discovered the data collection issue on October 28th, they wiped all of it. It's gone. They don't even need to provide their firmware update service anymore, as they did before, because as they explained before, they need that data to actually facilitate their operation. So apparently they no longer need it anymore. Prior to deletion, let's just put our minds at ease. Prior to deletion, the SMS message data, again, not the frequency data, well, probably it's but anyway, SMS message data, it all remained encrypted, and nobody had ever seen it, and it was never decompressed, decrypted, or accessed. Also, we know they put everything in one file, in zip file, and encrypt that one. So if they want to access other pieces of data, they need to decrypt it anyway. So who knows? What they have done with the data, previously it was stored on the servers, but now they're deleting it, and yeah, everything's okay. Yeah, another thing, not important, but basically their priority about customer privacy was not a big concern of theirs before October 28th, but now it is. So now they have suspended collection, and they deleted everything, and they now have developed or are developing a new version of software which does not collect the data. Just imagine, they had been running like their company for years, and now they have finally developed a version of their software which does not collect the private information. Interesting. But it had to be developed separately. So, and then they're working with the company to actually provide a new version. And they mentioned 3 devices which were affected, but we collaborated with our Swiss colleagues, and they have, from the live traffic analysis, we have a list of at least 150 devices, different devices that are actually affected. So they ever mention only version 5 and 5.5 where the problem is actually fixed, but the older versions, and we know the situation with Android, they're still running old software, and they might never be actually patched or actually new versions updated. So, conclusions. Adups lies. Not only the 6 devices mentioned are affected, we know way more. They have been way longer, like they only mentioned October 28 and like 17 days in before. But as we saw on the graph, they're like, it goes back like years, 2 years at least. As I said, older devices might never get a fixed version, and still the traffic is live. We saw in our traffic that in some cases, with the bad requests, they still get 5.0 or 4.04 or some responses. The data is still being sent, don't get me wrong. It's, the software is not updated, but they're just responding with error codes instead of giving back instructions. So it's like in a half working mode anyway. So another conclusion, as I said in the beginning, you don't actually own your device. It's your manufacturer who does. And it doesn't matter whether it's a cheap Chinese device or Apple or Google. It's still the vendor who controls it. And in the end, it boils down, who do you trust? So what can you do? Just don't blindly trust anybody. Brand actually matters in this case. Don't buy cheap stuff, because if you do, you are actually creating or increasing the market for cheap devices and make this stuff just proliferate. And in our case, we collaborated with a company that also operates here in Latvia, just 5, and their devices were also affected. But this year, with our collaboration, they actually have switched away from Adups to a different firmware over their software provider. So that's it from me. Thank you.